Hello everyone, welcome to your first project with our company. We'll be working on this evening and calling up until 8:30 this evening. Calling into the Bristol, Connecticut area and asking people questions about the November general election. We will first be looking for the youngest man in the household who is registered to vote, followed by the youngest woman in the household who is registered to vote. Although whoever we get on the phone that is willing to participate, as long as they are a registered voter, we will ask them the questions and get them to participate in the study. Hello, my name is whatever your name happens to be. Some people don't feel comfortable using their full real name, and that's a-okay. Just let us know what name you're using and use that name consistently. Hello, my name is George, and I'm calling from Orion Market Research. I want to emphasize that this is not an attempt to sell you anything or solicit funds. We're conducting a study in Bristol, and with registered voters, this phone number is on my list, and I was just wondering if you had a few minutes to participate. Again, you can switch that up to say pretty much whatever you feel will get someone to complete the interview with you. Do you have a few minutes? May I ask you some questions? Things of that nature. Just to confirm, are you registered to vote as A, Democrat, Republican, or Independent? And how likely are you to vote in the November general election in Bristol this year? Very likely, somewhat likely, or not likely. There's also a not sure, which we will not read, and on screen there will be instructions for each. Very likely they will continue, somewhat likely they will continue. If they give you a not likely answer, the interview will end. Generally speaking, do you think things in Bristol are headed in the right direction, or do you feel that things are off on the wrong track? Right direction, wrong track, or not sure? Not sure, we will not read. If the election for Bristol's mayor was held today and the candidates were a Republican or a Democrat, for whom would you vote? Republican, leaning towards Republican; Democrat, leaning towards Democrat; Independent, or leaning towards Independent. There's also an other or a not sure option, which we will not read. Instructions will be on screen. If the election for Bristol's mayor were held today and the candidates were Republican Ken Cockayne or Democrat Chris Wilson, for whom would you vote? Republican Ken Cockayne, leaning towards Republican Ken Cockayne; Democrat Chris Wilson, leaning towards Democrat Chris Wilson; and again, other or not sure, which we do not read. That name, Ken Cockayne, will be about the most difficult name we pronounce this evening, and you will want to practice that because obviously there may be a few mispronunciations with how the name is spelled and how the name sounds. It is Ken Cockayne. Please tell me if your overall opinion of each of the following people or organizations is very favorable, somewhat unfavorable, or very unfavorable, or are you not familiar enough to form an opinion? Ellen Zoppo. Ellen Zoppo. Very favorable, somewhat unfavorable, very unfavorable, or not familiar. There is a not sure option, however, we will not be reading that to them. The Bristol Board of Education. Chris Wilson. Ken Cockayne. Art Ward. Dan Malloy. Very favorable, somewhat unfavorable, very unfavorable, not familiar. Feel free to skip over some of those options if the people understand that those are their options: very favorable, somewhat unfavorable, very unfavorable, or not familiar. Now, in your own words, what are the top two issues facing the city of Bristol? I have some choices to read, and please pick two. Taxes, government corruption, jobs in the economy, education or schools, housing costs, public safety, crime, drugs, and violence, parking, transportation, city government spending or budget, or if there is an other, please specify. If they do choose the other, then you will again ask them to please specify. It will bring up another screen on your computer, and you will type in what they say verbatim. That means word for word. Now please tell me whether you rate each of the following public officials' performance in office as excellent, good, only fair, or poor. Outgoing Mayor Art Ward, Bristol City Councilor Ken Cockayne, Bristol Board of Education Chairman Chris Wilson, Governor Dan Malloy, excellent, good, fair, poor, or no opinion. Here are some statements made about the candidates running for office in Bristol this year. For each, please tell me whether the statement, if accurate, makes you more likely to vote for that candidate, much more likely to vote for that candidate, less likely to vote for the candidate, much less likely to vote for the candidate, or whether it makes no difference to you. Then you'll read these series of statements. Ken Cockayne's supporters say he is a strong leader who will not be influenced by party politics or special interests inside city government and will stand up for what is best for the city of Bristol. Does knowing this make you? And we go through that list one more time. Over the past 5 years, Ken Cockayne has served on 21 public boards, including the Bristol Development Authority, the Downtown Development Corporation, and Public Works. Ken Cockayne has the experience we need in City Hall. Does knowing this make you? And we read through that list. Ken Cockayne says he is a fiscal conservative whose number one job is to protect your tax dollars and to assure that the city of Bristol is run in the most efficient and effective way possible. Critics of Ken Cockayne say he is difficult to work with, that he angers easily, and he doesn't work in a civil or cooperative way with other city leaders. Some have called Cockayne a bully. Would you say that would make you much more likely to vote for Cockayne? More likely to vote for Cockayne? Don't know or don't have an opinion? Less likely to vote for Cockayne? Much less likely to vote for Cockayne? Or does it make no difference to you? There is also a not sure, not an accurate statement selection. Please do not read that. Other critics of Cockayne say that with just 5 years of civic involvement, Cockayne just doesn't have the experience to be mayor of a city with a $185 million budget, and that list applies here again. Finally, Cockayne's critics say that while on the Bristol Development Authority, Ken Cockayne approved many taxpayer-funded loans to local businesses that failed and proved to be a waste of tax dollars. Democratic mayoral candidate Chris Wilson is a husband and father who has lived in Bristol for 30 years. Chris was honorably discharged from the United States Army and has volunteered with many local organizations including the Jaycees, the Bristol Chamber of Commerce, the United Way, and on the Bristol Board of Education. Would knowing this make you more likely to vote for Chris Wilson, much more likely to vote for Chris Wilson, less likely to vote for Mr. Wilson, or much less likely to vote for Chris Wilson? Or does it make no difference to you? While serving as chairman of the Bristol Board of Education, Chris Wilson returned nearly $5 million in surplus Board of Education dollars to Bristol taxpayers while receiving 0 budget increases and helping to improve school test scores. And that same list applies here. As mayor, Chris Wilson promises to work with local police to crack down on Bristol's blighted neighborhoods and eliminate areas where drugs and gang activity can exist. Chris Wilson's critics say that Wilson is too close to local education interests. Wilson's opponents say that Wilson may put the needs of these interests and his political allies ahead of the needs of taxpayers. You say that would make you much more likely to vote for Wilson, less likely to vote for Wilson, no difference. Other critics of Chris Wilson say he's just a political opportunist who recently switched from being a Republican to Democrat so that he could run for mayor. And that same list applies. Finally, other critics say that Chris Wilson is just another tax and spend liberal who, while serving on the Board of Education, consistently asked for big budget increases and additional spending. Sometimes people may change their minds in a survey like this. If the general election for Bristol's city mayor were held today and the candidates were Democrat Chris Wilson and Republican Ken Cockayne, for whom would you vote? Wilson, leaning towards Wilson. Ken Cockayne, leaning towards Ken Cockayne. And finally, I just have a few questions for classification purposes. What is your age range? 18 to 34, 35 to 50, 51 to 64, or 65 and over? Then it will ask you to simply record the gender, male or female. What level of schooling have you completed? High school, some college, 2-year college, technical or agricultural school, college graduate, or post-college graduate. Thank you very much for taking the time to complete this survey today, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much. End the interview in as positive way as possible, thanking them profusely, and then go ahead and disposition your call on the sheet as move on to your next call. Feel free to contact either Angela or myself with any questions this evening. The phone numbers are available to you in the training materials that I have emailed out to you. I know this has been a last minute type of thing, but it happens a lot in our industry, so we need to get used to being able to work on the fly. And once you do go through the study 2 or 3 times, usually most people are able to be quite professional with it by that point and able to handle it. So take some time to look at the study before you get started, become familiar with it. Hopefully this video helps. And yes, I always wear the sunglasses in the videos. Thanks a lot, and everybody have a great night. Call us if you have any questions, email us if you have any questions, or even use the chat box feature on the Google Drive, and you can contact us that way as we do monitor calls through the evening. Thank you very much again, and have a wonderful night.